We really took a
Wow,
deep
that was
rabbit
like
hole there.
completely not in this chapter, but it all related back. Homeschooling. Gotta say.
Homeschooling. Hello, everybody. To our new listeners, welcome. To our old listeners, welcome back. We are the Perspective Potterheads, Jenny B and Terri T. And we're here to discuss our favorite fandoms, starting with and primarily focusing on Harry Potter content. So if you like our content, like it. And if you love it, share it, subscribe, support.
Today we will be talking about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 4, The Keeper of the Keys. And just a note, if this is your first time listening, spoilers ahead. While we're talking about Chapter 4 in book 1, we will also reference most of the other books at some point. So no secrets here. Can I say I love this chapter? I love Hagrid. I love this chapter.
I have some mixed feelings on it, to be honest.
Really? I love that Hagrid is just so mean to the Dursleys. I love it, love it, love it. It's like
that's my biggest thing against it.
Really? I love that he's mean to the Dursleys because they deserve it. First off, I love how Rowling describes Hagrid. Like her physical descriptions of him, and just throughout the chapter and throughout the books, like the way she, like the things she says about him. And I think it's less as the books go on, but like later on, he claps his hand to his forehead with enough force to knock over a cart horse. Like you really get the sense of his size in something like, and I know that there's limitations on what they're able to do, but something that like, even with the movies, I don't think they give his full size. I don't think he's as big as he could be, at least not in my imagination. Like he's huge and I love it.
Yeah. And I don't think because I think it comes later where they describe some of his height and his width in a bit more detail and about how gigantic he is. And like but in here, like in the movies and stuff, you think, oh, like, he's more like an 8 foot, 9 foot tall person, whereas he's probably closer to like 10, 11, 12 feet. And like how much bigger and wider that actually is than what we see him as, like versus just like a very husky person. Yeah. Versus like he's gigantic, like literally gigantic.
He's gigantic. And in my head, like I love the idea of how large he is. You know, he could easily just pick up the door and set it back in its frame. Like he has to crouch because he's so big. So the book basically, like this chapter starts with Hagrid banging down the door. Yeah. And I know we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, like with that boom. And, you know, maybe Hagrid would have knocked a little more timidly, but I think sometimes Hagrid isn't aware of how big he is. And so he's just knocking, but it's like that amount of force that's behind it.
I think that Hagrid knows his strength because he deals with creatures and he's so gentle with them. If he wasn't aware of it, he'd be more like Lenny from Of Mice and Men.
Okay, I get it. Yeah, I think you're right. But like when he hugs Harry's like, it's always like a rib cracking hug. Like,
yeah, he almost... I think he can get overexcited. So, because when he carries Harry, like baby Harry, obviously he's not like
super gentle.
He has enough gentleness to take baby Harry. So, and to handle like rats and cats and like bowtruckles and things like that, and unicorns, even
baby unicorns.
Yeah. So my first thing is actually this second line where, and again, it's one of those things where I think that J.K. Rowling could do better at pointing out that Dudley is stupid and mean in a better way than just saying like, he said stupidly, because, okay, if you wake me up in the middle of the night and I'm in like a weird dream, I'm going to wake up stupid too. Like, where's the canon? If I was dreaming like something like that, then of course I'm going to wake up and think, you know, when I hear loud boom. So it's one of the things that just kind of irks me again
Yes.
with her. Like there's a better way to do it. I've seen better writing from her in these books. I've also seen some pretty bad writing in here. We'll get to that when we get to that. but I think the other ones can be more easily explained in other ways. But like, I don't know. I just think that there's a better way to do it.
I don't know. I feel like it's because I don't even know that it was necessarily that Dudley was stupid. It's just kind of the way he said it. It is my take on it. Like he just kind of like mumbled like, what? And I do think it's interesting. The child with no imagination thinks it's a canon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. We find out what.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say we found out what Uncle Vernon bought.
Yes.
And I don't think that was like too much of a mystery that like either one of us were like really curious about it in the last one, maybe because we knew.
Yeah.
Or because he was just doing some really wild things. It was just like, oh, well, there's another one. Like, but now we find out that it's a rifle. And I'm wondering, because like in the States, in most places, there are waiting periods for guns unless you buy them on the black market and things like that. And I would think that Europe has stronger regulations in those things.
I really don't know. But he had this like dodgy old man take them out to the hut on the rock in his rowboat.
Yeah, like how does he even...
Did he buy the gun from him? That's what I was curious. Like, how did she obtain that rifle? Does he know how to use it? Is my next question. Because somebody could hand me a rifle, and I really and honestly, like as much as my husband's family, as they did shooting sports growing up and things like that. And I have shot a rifle before. I took 4-H camp and, have practiced shooting at targets. But if somebody handed me a rifle, I'd be like, thanks. I don't know how to use it. So does Vernon actually know how to use that gun?
Maybe he's just like, all I got to do is point and shoot. Like, because if somebody handed me a gun to use, I would probably just assume point and shoot. I wouldn't be ready for things like they tell you in the movies, like your recoil and the safety and all that stuff. I wouldn't have any clue. So I've never handled a gun before, aside from my friend handing me one from her glove box and telling me to take it to her boyfriend in the house. And I held it like this. Yeah.
A little more experience than that, but not by much. And not since I was like 11, 12. Like I was Harry's age when I was learning to shoot a gun, which is pretty sad. We did rifle and we learned bows, I liked the bow and arrow better. I thought it was more fun. But again, I haven't done that since I was 15, 16 at the very latest, probably younger than that. So
wizards are kind of old school. Like we see that later, like they don't have this technology and stuff like that. They use the quill and the parchment and
technology doesn't work. Anything with electronic.
Now, like guns aren't like electronic, but still like back in like the day of the era of when I imagine wizards, like bows and arrows and things like that were kind of a norm. And so I would assume that those would still work on wizards. And yet, and you have like these families that are muggle born going into the wizarding world, and when they're fighting the war against Voldemort, wouldn't you think, let's pull out all the stops, especially Dumbledore, who knows that Voldemort underestimates the magic that he doesn't consider, he underestimates the youth, because they're obvious underage wizardry. He underestimates elf magic. So obviously muggles, because he's a pureblood.
I think there's just a general separation. You see that in the 5th book with Arthur when he gets attacked. And he's like, we tried this muggle remedy called stitches. And Molly's freaking out. And it's considered super out there and weird. So I think there's just a general separation. Like they don't need a different weapon other than their wands. And I think that's kind of
Godric Gryffindor had a sword though.
True.
And Harry even mentions to the minister in the 7th book, like, oh, I don't know. Has anybody ever tried to run through Voldemort with a sword? Why not? I mean, it does take on like a couple of the Horcruxes, so the sword does work.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, it's a magic sword and yada yada, but still, like, couldn't.
And they have armor. Like they talk about, like the suits of armor are there. Like I feel like they're not even up to like the bow and arrow stage. They're just like, wear some armor, have a sword. Maybe they joust. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's almost like the wizarding world stopped progressing in certain areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, they do still have slaves. They do still have the house elves. So
yeah, so he's got this gun pointing, and I love how Hagrid walks in, bangs down that door, he walks in, he picks it up, and he's like, Vernon's standing there with a gun, and he's like, couldn't make a cup of tea, could you?
Yeah.
You just banged into this door, like busted in, and you're like, let's make some tea. But that's so
It is midnight.
And it's, it's the middle of the night.
And like, I don't think Hagrid would be necessarily so afraid of a gun. It'd probably just, I don't want to say like bounce right off of him, but like gets cast with like all these multiple wand spells that do nothing.
Yeah.
Because like giant skin is like thicker or something like that. So yeah, I don't see him being scared of much. But
he just like makes himself at home. He comes in and he's like, looks at Dudley and he's like, move it. Budge up, you great lump.
So there's a lot of fat shaming in this.
There is.
Hagrid knows. I'm sure that Hagrid knows that these people are horrible to them, you know, to Harry. And I don't know. And I'm sure that he knows like that Dudley is spoiled. And Dudley is the worst, you know, like there are definitely worse people than Dudley, but Dudley is pretty bad.
Yeah.
And I just feel it's kind of I feel kind of the same way about Malfoy too, because it's not really their fault, because this is how they were raised. Nobody else disciplined them any other way. This is their normal.
Yes.
And until they know better and learn better, then they start doing better. Because once Dudley gets that Dementor attack, he sees it and he's like, oh shit, like he gets that realization.
Yeah.
And like eventually, you know, Draco comes to that too. Like he's like, this is way darker and deeper than I ever imagined it would go, beyond just some name calling and a little bit of, you know, rough and tumble stuff. But again, like that's, you know, if we're talking about Vernon was, you know, potentially hitting and getting violent, and if he sees that with Harry, and then he's like, okay, if my dad's doing that,
yes,
you know, to him,
it's
and then
normal.
he's witnessed it, it's normal. That's what you do. And his parents aren't doing anything about it. The people at school aren't doing anything about it. So it must be okay to do.
It must be okay. And then
when these things come down and like, it's, you know, and Dudley in this time is just standing there. Like he's scared. He doesn't know what's going on. Vernon and Petunia know everything. And yet Hagrid takes it all out on Dudley, and only Dudley. He's the one who is fat shaming him. He's calling him, you know, you great lump. He's pretty much a pig already. Like, and some of those things are genetic. Some of them are just, again, the product of him being
poorly raised.
Yeah.
I do think Hagrid has a very straightforward way of looking at things. And as much as they act like nobody knew what was going on with Harry, I think everybody kind of knew that Dudley was not nice and the Dursleys were not nice. And I think Hagrid is very much like, you're not nice, I'm going to be not nice to you. Because Hagrid has a very quick temper and he is a bit more retaliatory. If think I was listening to Goblet of Fire last night. So that's what's fresh in my mind. But when Karkaroff insults Dumbledore and spits at him, Hagrid immediately has got him up by the throat.
Yeah.
Like slams him into a tree. And that's another like situation where like, I genuinely like Hagrid is one of the best characters. He has that big heart, but he also is incredibly protective of the people he's close to, regardless of the consequences of his actions.
But like he was close to Lily and James, and I don't know at what point he became close with them because he was the keeper of keys back when they were in school. And obviously Snape was there when they were in school, but now he works with Snape at the school. So like, how did that kind of all get mended? Because I'm sure if he was close with Lily and James then, he would have been more gruff towards Snape.
Hagrid has a very deep respect for the teachers. In general, with a few exceptions, Lockhart being one of them. And obviously nobody liked Umbridge.
Oh, yeah.
But he has a general respect for the teachers of Hogwarts as an institution, which I think it dates the book. It does. That is and this is something like my dad and I were discussing, that there's a lot of like a loss of respect for professions, teachers, doctors, and some of it is self-created. Like a couple teachers do some really bad stuff and it, gives the whole profession a bad name. Same thing, doctors, etc. Like, so there's just a general mistrust. Like it used to be, oh, that person's a teacher. They've got to be good people. And that's not the case anymore. And I think Hagrid goes along with that. Like, oh, they're teachers. Good people. These are nasty, mean muggles, bad people. And I think he sees his world as a lot more black and white, where you and I tend to live in the gray.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
I had a movie point, and I know we'll get into the movie, but this is something that I vividly remember from the movie, that he didn't recognize Harry in the movie. And that bothered me so bad.
Right.
And this is also our first glimpse of Harry, him telling Harry, you look like your dad, but you have your mom's eyes. And that is, a recurrent in the book.
Yeah.
All the way through. But I do, that's the first time we hear it.
What does a keeper of keys and grounds do?
Anything.
Like what do these keys belong to? And is Hagrid like mowing the lawn when he's keeper of the grounds? Like,
do they have to mow the lawn, or is that enchanted?
It's got to be.
Nobody
enchanted,
ever mows the lawn. Harry mows the lawn in Muggle World.
On a lawnmower.
Would
the lawnmower even work?
I don't know. Maybe it's one of those like mechanical ones. If I had one of those like really old lawnmower,
yeah,
because it'd be fun.
But like, why even use a key if you could just Alohomora everything?
But Hagrid anyway.
Can't. He can't.
So he has.
So is that why he has to have the keys?
I don't know.
So that he can get into those rooms, or Filch?
If Filch has keys,
yeah. So then Filch is also a keeper of the keys. Like, I don't know. It just seems kind of like a useless title to me.
I don't know. I think it makes him feel important.
Right.
And he is arguably like, if Dumbledore needs something done, it's usually Hagrid. Hagrid fetches things.
That's his job, is to do Dumbledore's bidding with an unofficial title of something else to make him feel like he's not just Dumbledore's lackey. And I think we mentioned this in another episode about him, like Dumbledore kind of being like the ringleader, similarly to Voldemort being a ringleader.
He has henchmen.
Yeah.
And
I feel like we're going to see that a lot more in the Fantastic Beasts, where he just kind of calls in those favors of the people and just kind of like, well, I did this, so now you got to do that type of thing. Yeah. I can see Dumbledore using that kind
I'm excited for the new Fantastic Beasts. Like, I can't wait to go watch it.
Hagrid's an alcoholic.
Well, yes, we know this. This is a theme throughout the books. Hagrid is an alcoholic. We know this.
Yeah. I mean, it's like really, it starts off almost subtle, like he pulls out a bottle of amber liquid, and then it's like, okay, I think he actually mentions that he would take something stronger if they had it in here. Yeah. Take something stronger if he had it. They don't, so he takes out his own.
Yes, he carries a flask.
Yeah.
He's high functioning alcoholic, but he's an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I do love that he like gives Vernon like no, not even the time of day. He's like, I demand that you leave at once. And he's like, oh, shut up.
Yeah.
Like he just, it was nothing, like not even like, it's like, you're non-entity. I'm not even entertaining what you have to say.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting on like how Harry reacts to Hagrid, because he doesn't seem really scared at all.
Mm-mm.
He's just talking to him like this is normal. And Hagrid thundered, barked, growled, like his anger fills the room. The Dursleys are cowering. And and I think this is actually when Harry's just like, and he's saying like, you know, this boy knows nothing about anything. And then he's like, but wait, I know maths.
Yeah, I know math. He's like, I know how to do math, which is more than I can say.
Right. I can add, and I remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So that's the extent of my math right there.
Exactly. I know enough to balance my checkbook.
So how did the other young, like the wizardborns, is that what they call it? Like wizardborn purebloods children?
They're not all purebloods because some of them are half-bloods and whatever. I don't know. Wizarding children.
So, but still, like how, like, they can't all be homeschooled, because then they would come in with very like inconsistent learning prior. So is there like some sort of like curriculum that they send that says like, hey, if you got a wizard, that they should at least learn these basic skills?
It almost reminds me like of kind of medieval learning where school wasn't a thing unless you went to university or to boarding school. Like there is just an expectation in wizarding families that you have taught your children. I think like that's kind of because like Ron doesn't seem to be behind, like he knows how to read.
Yeah, that's true.
I've often wondered that, like, do they go to school? Are they homeschooled? Who homeschools them?
And you would think that would be really hard for Mrs. Weasley to raise 7 children on how they all like getting all of their reading and writing and arithmetic and all that stuff done and keeping them all up like ahead and on track of things.
I don't know. So come next fall, we might have more perspective on this because
yeah,
homeschooling is like with the pandemic, and I can, say this is homeschool, like even with the support of the teachers, like it's hard because, and most of it is we're at home. They don't want to, we just did a week of remote learning and they're supposed to go back on Tuesday. And I hope so, but I don't hope so. Let's not get into the COVID thing, but right. Homeschooling's hard, especially when you have multiples doing multiple ages, So, but we teach, if it's part of what you do and not like something that's just like random, like, hey, this week you're going to homeschool your kids, have fun. There is ways to, like a lot of big families, actually, they're very successful at homeschooling.
Okay.
I've read, it's a topic of interest for me because I'm weird.
Well, we're all a little weird.
I would like to homeschool my children. I think it'd be fun. It's hard, but I would love to, teach math and fractions by baking a cake rather than a worksheet. I think it'd be more fun that way.
Maybe that's how they do it in the wizarding world. Everything's just more practical use instead of like sit down and rote learn.
And you're not going to need to learn algebra.
Right. Because that's the thing, is like even when we're in school, it's like, when am I ever going to learn or use this? Most of the math I haven't done, or I have to figure out how to use my math in the real world on my own using things that are just very basic.
Yes. Nobody taught me how to do taxes.
Yeah, right. That's something you got to learn how to do on your own with just those very basic things. I mean, like, and
set a budget or save or invest. And I still don't know if I'm doing those things right. And I'm in my 30s. Like,
yeah,
there's a lot of things that like I'm trying to figure out now that I probably should have arguably figured out in my late teens, early 20s. But they just weren't a priority. And I mean, I have a bachelor's degree. But that stuff, it wasn't a college thing. It wasn't a high school thing. They didn't teach us those things.
Like in the wizarding world, when you get out of, when you graduate from Hogwarts, like what do you do? Like you go to the ministry, or you work as a curse breaker, or you work at Gringotts, or a teacher.
Your Newt Scamander.
Or your Newt Scamander. Like you have 5 options, and Newt Scamander is usually already taken.
You could,
unless you're Hagrid.
Well, no, I think there's a lot more options. Like you think about, like you could open a business, like the Weasleys do, or Florian Fortescue or Ollivander. You could run a pub like Madame Rossmurder. You can be a healer. You can go into banking. You can start your own newspaper or magazine.
Yeah.
Xenophilius. I think there's a lot more that maybe we don't even see, because like there's tons and tons of pamphlets. And the ministry, while we think, oh, you're just going into government, is a whole like, do you want to be an unspeakable? Do you want to be in do you want to be in the Department of Magical Games and Sports? Do you want to be in oh, come on, why are they're not coming to me?
Right. I know what you're saying.
Like there's variety
like
within.
you kind of know, like, I mean, like, I feel like the majority of the things that you could do, it's like, okay, you could go into business or like you could do, but like each of those things probably has its own subset as far as charms and transfiguration and potions and this and that. And it's like, because those major subjects, and then it's like, well, what do you need to like to get to that very basic level of like going into potions? You need to probably know how to like add this like measurements and stuff like that. So as long as, like you were saying, practical uses, and if you're doing stuff around the house, getting your kids to help you out with stuff, and if you're a witch and wizard, you're going to be using magic and potions and charms and transfiguration every day. You're going to see that practical use every day. They're going to see that swish and flick. And I guess that's more important than learning like through the rote.
I think there's an arguable like, and something that I kind of wonder with my kids, like, why are they teaching this? And, if like a higher math, if one of my kiddos wanted to be an engineer or something like that, like, yes, that higher math is really useful. If Jamie does decide he wants to go be an astronaut, he'll need that math and science. Right. But if, I feel like I try to keep a really balanced approach with my kids in education, in that, like, if they want to paint, I encourage that. If they want to write, if they want to draw, if they want if they like baking, if they're interested in doing something like this. I mean, once they're a little older, I don't want them plastered on the internet at this age, but I kind of try to, while I do feel very strongly towards academics, I would, if I was independently wealthy, I would just go to school.
Yeah.
Because I find there's just so much to learn, really showing my Ravenclaw side.
But there's also a lot that, like you were saying, like in that creative aspect, like there's a lot you can learn through the arts and through music and through all of that stuff. They don't have any of that at Hogwarts. A lot of it is, this is the spell, learn it.
Very true.
Unless you're Snape, and then you can create whatever you want and write it in your little black book. But and creating spells and stuff that are unministry approved.
But it all, like, I think relates back to real life, whereas
yeah.
Oh, and then
it definitely has practical use. It's just but where is their sense of what can they create? Like
divination. They can create their own.
oh gosh. Unless
Due
you're a
to
centaur.
the conjunction of Mercury and Jupiter, I will lose a bet. You seem to be drowning twice this month.
Oh, let me change that.
I think there is, I don't think Harry and Hermione and Ron really explore that because they're very purpose driven. Like from like book 5 on, like it is, they are actually more like Goblet of Fire on. They know that their job is going to be to fight Voldemort.
Yeah. Well, like Fred and George are very creative and they get yelled at all the time. Like, I mean, in school, their grades aren't that great. You know, Mrs. Weasley's constantly on them, those bangs and sound. Like, who knew they were doing productive things in there? Like, but like it has a huge payoff with their creativity once it's allowed to flourish.
And if you look at like James and Sirius and Lupin, they, you know, create the Marauders map. They, you know, there is that level of creativity there. And Harry, to an extent, I think with the DA, in line with what his goal and purpose is, he creates his own army.
Yeah.
That he ends up using at the end.
We really took a
wow, that was like completely not in this chapter, but it all related back. Homeschooling. Gotta say.
Yes.
So I know you've mentioned this before and about Harry and his like imperfections. And I think it's very, very showing, like Hagrid hands him this cake and he meant to say thank you, but he's like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I think like that whole scene like just shows like he's confused, but he's not scared. No, to go back to that point that you made, he's not scared.
Right.
But unless like the snakes got wrapped around him and he's like, and Voldemort's on his way, Harry really doesn't spend a lot of time being scared.
Maybe that's because he was like living in fear his whole life type of thing. Kind of just like toughened him up. He's like, I'm used to that.
Yeah. And honestly, like if your life is super bad, what's this guy offering? Okay, maybe it will be better. Like there's a whole lot more of a willingness to take a risk. And Harry's good at risk taking anyway. We've had our conversation about Gryffindors and their impulse control or lack thereof. To go along with that, when Hagrid gets angry, like, what do you mean you don't know?
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm sorry. He immediately apologizes. Like, he's like, I'm sorry. Which again goes back to that.
Yeah. And when like when he's yelling at him and stuff and he tells them like, what do you mean he doesn't know who he is? Like he left this letter. I saw him leave the letter but he didn't see what was inside the letter and like what all he was supposed to be. Like, cause he's like, I didn't know what you did, but I was in the letter. How does he know what was in the letter? Like, did Dumbledore tell him? Or and how do you fit it all in a letter?
Go back to that. How do you fit it in a letter?
Every single time we're going to refer to chapter 1 because how do you fit that in a letter?
I think Hagrid again, it goes back to he trusts Dumbledore. Dumbledore explained this to you. Why doesn't he know what happened? Why doesn't he know anything? And you know, there's you're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what?
I'm a what? A what? Wait,
a what?
And he like hands him his letter. Like, here, this will explain it.
Yeah.
Again, the letter does not do the job.
The letter, like when we finally get it, it's like it's about time, you know, because we've been like, you know, 1.5 chapters so far of these letters. What does it say? Yeah, and like, we get to it and we read the address. And everything has been so specific so far. Mr. H. Potter, the floor, the hut on the rock, the sea. Which sea? We're so specific up to this point, and it's like this unnamed sea. I don't know.
And the letter is less than, especially like given like how specific it was. It's just like, we're pleased to, I'll read the letter.
Sure. Yeah.
It's very short, sweet, to the point.
Yep.
Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. That's it. And if he had actually gotten this, if he had read this letter in the hall,
yeah,
like he said, I wish I would have opened it in the hall. Would he have known what to do? Like, would he have known, like, what? And he even asks Hagrid, he like looks at it and he's like, he's got all these questions. He's like, what do they mean? Oh, wait, it's my owl.
He would probably think that it would be like a prank from like Dudley's gang or somebody from school, or like I don't think he would believe it. And like the funny part is like, because it does have like that that heading of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, and like that part is just as big as the actual meat and potatoes of the letter itself.
Oh yeah, I skipped that part because I just didn't like. I don't want to read off Dumbledore's titles.
Right. And I don't know why some of it is just abbreviated. Why can't they just spell out all of it? It's long enough already, but come on. Grand Source, just say Sorcerer. Chief, it's like 2 more letters. Of the Confederation, you've already got Confed. Come on. Like,
at least they don't have Dumbledore's whole name. Make it even longer.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised they don't. They got to list all of those other things.
I also, in this scene is just so precious to me because they're like, Hagrid's like, oh, I've got to send the owl, and he pulls an owl out of his pocket.
That poor thing. And he's obviously got the dormice in there. He's got that dormice in there later, probably to feed to the owl. Because I'm sure that those things get hungry, especially if they're just like stuffed into a pocket. That's like, they're lucky they don't have PETA, or that Hermione hasn't invented spew yet.
Mistreatment of the owls living in Hagrid's pocket. But are they like pockets like the beaded bag, like undetectable extension charm pockets?
Maybe. And I mean, he's big enough anyway. Like, these pockets got to be pretty big to just go with Hagrid's outfit, I think. And varying sizes, so I don't know.
And I do love the letter that Hagrid writes back to Dumbledore. Like, dear Professor Dumbledore, given Harry his letter, taking him to buy his things tomorrow. Weather's horrible. Hope you're well, Hagrid. Hagrid.
It's very like, has like that childlike innocence to it. But I also expected there to be some spelling errors. Like the way that Hagrid talks and when he says he can't spell Voldemort, like I expected there to be like grammatical, like hope you're well, like the wrong kind of your, or taking his things tomorrow, like missing an R or something like that. Maybe not that Hagrid's like not that he's not smart, but he also just doesn't seem very, I mean, he got expelled at like in his third year at Hogwarts. So
I feel like that's a movie thing. And this is probably my biggest beef with the movies is they take whatever that flaw, with the exception of Harry. Harry's perfect in the movies, which makes me.
Yeah. That was like the opposite with that.
But they take that like Ron's, kind of, they make Ron almost scaredy. They make Hagrid really stupid. They take those flaws and they really accentuate them, which I feel like is, again, the depth of a book can never be accurately translated. Even if you did like, there's just so much you miss in the context because you can't get in their head unless you have them walking around with thought bubbles. Like you don't get in their head as much in a movie as you do in a book. But I feel like that is, Hagrid's not as dumb as they make him out to be in the movies. And I think that sometimes that perception, I catch myself with that. I'm like, well, Hagrid's actually smarter than we think he is.
It just
he has to
like,
be.
I feel like he gets tricked into telling people like, or maybe that's just because he's an alcoholic. It's probably because he's an alcoholic.
I think the alcoholic thing. And the other thing is, I think you captured it when you said a childlike innocence. Hagrid wants to believe the best in people. He wants to have that trust almost to the extreme fault. Like Dumbledore trusts within reason. Moody doesn't trust at all.
Right.
And Hagrid trusts everybody a little bit too much. He's a little too friendly. And I definitely, I think that innocence and naivete tend to be equated with ignorance. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's my little soapbox on Hagrid. Like, he's not a dummy.
Vernon says that Harry will not go. Like, he's just, so here's the thing. Dumbledore gives guardianship to these people. So they're his guardians, his legal guardians. And so and then he's like, he gets the letter and his guardian says he's not going. And they're all like, yeah, we're just going to take him anyway. Like, I mean, he can't go into Hogsmeade because his guardian didn't sign that paper.
Which I think that would have been, there's other like factors. I think they would have given him permission.
Probably. It's, but yeah, I mean, like when Voldemort comes back, and I think it's like the Patil family, their parents want to keep them home. Somebody else says, you know, I think it was Draco says that his parents were thinking about sending him to Durmstrang. Yeah. I think at some other point they mentioned that you always have the choice to send your kids to Hogwarts or to keep them home. So wizards have that choice.
Yes.
But Muggle parents don't? Or just the Dursleys don't?
Just the Dursleys don't.
Which again is just very, and I think that just plays into Dumbledore's plan. Because I think with any other wizarding family, Muggle family, like they would try to like maybe talk about if they hold in that magic, then they're going to become an Obscurus, or they're going to have these growth issues. It's really best. They're going to work with them to try to convince them. But because Dumbledore needs Harry for the prophecy and to see what he's capable of, which we'll get into all of that crap later on in this book.
Let's not open that can of worms.
It starts early, but Dumbledore needs Harry as his pawn. And so it's just, but so it's like, why not just raise Harry as your own I mean, I know he wants to distance himself emotionally, but there's got to be someone you trust to do it, to prime him. You know better.
Who should have raised Harry? My personal opinion. I honestly think Harry should have been raised by McGonagall, because she don't care if he's the chosen one or not. He is going to listen.
Yeah.
You're not going to like, you don't,
I can see her having.
She doesn't give him special treatment, with maybe the Quidditch exception. And that I think has more to do with her wanting Gryffindor to win.
Yeah.
Than it does anything to do with Harry.
Yeah.
She would have done a phenomenal job raising him. And I because my mom and I have gone back and forth on this one, because I'm like, I don't think there's ever an excuse to leave a child in a situation where they're being abused. And she's like, but he wasn't safe. I'm like, Dumbledore couldn't figure out another way to keep him safe.
I know. Dumbledore could. Well, then again, after Voldemort just fell, and the only protection that he actually had and was, I guess, going to, because they had that blood bond with, and that was the whole reason Lily did that, right? To sacrifice herself.
I don't even know
to save him, but I don't know that she knew that Dumbledore knew that if he went to, after she died, if he went to go live with his aunt, that he would still have that protection.
Because honestly, the Potters named Sirius as his guardian.
As his godfather, not his guardian.
He does say specifically, like, I'm your godfather, which means I would be your guardian. He says
like
it in
that's
book
like
3. That I know.
Okay.
When
Because
they're
I was gonna say, I
walking,
feel like that's more of like a movie book, like a movie and a book thing versus like what's out in the real world. And maybe it's different in the wizard world. Because like in the muggle world, it's like the godparent does not raise, you know what I mean? Like they're not the guardians. They're supposed to help out like raising them
spiritually.
And hardly ever. I don't even know who my godmother is. I always forget. I think it was like one of my mom's friends from back in the day. So
I have
I'm a
4 kids. I
godmother
have
to
4
somebody
sisters.
I never talked to.
But Sirius does say that. He does say that like he would have been his guardian. And he argues it with Hagrid. He goes, "Give Harry to me."
Mm-hmm.
And could you imagine a Harry raised by Sirius and Lupin?
If Lupin was involved, that would balance it out. That would definitely balance it out. Because I can see Lupin kind of stepping up a little bit to say, like, you know, setting some ground rules.
Don't let the baby drive the motorcycle.
Yeah. Make sure he's got a helmet on at the very least.
But I like it would be a very different upbringing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I've seen some fan fiction about that. So, and it's really sweet, some of the stuff.
So
there's some like words in here when Hagrid, and I think it's part of like his passion kind of blindsiding him here.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that again, Hagrid's got like that big heart, but at the same time, when he's doing this, it's like it's generalizing all muggles. Like, and it's when he says, "I'd like to see a great muggle like you try to stop him." Like he's like the most like a great muggle, as in he's the most, and he even says the biggest muggles I ever saw. Like, and I don't think he means
but I get his meaning, like, and the Dursleys, like, they're proud of that. I think if they understood like what he was saying, they'd be like, yeah, of course we are the most non-magical people you could find. We don't hold with that nonsense, the dangerous nonsense.
And I guess that was like my thing. I was thinking like, is there like a spectrum of muggleness? Like, I mean, if there was, I feel like I would be more towards the witchy side of it.
Me too.
So, but yeah, it was just weird to me to like a great muggle like you, and you're the biggest muggles I've ever saw. And it almost has like that, it's just negative. Like the way it's always used when somebody calls somebody a muggle is typically in that negative sense. And I know that there's like, you know, the mudblood is an even worse word for it, and people don't like saying it. But just the way that it's thrown around like that is it seems kind of racist.
I think there is a lot of, and this is one of the the beautiful things about Rowling's writing, is like there is a lot of that underpinnings of racism and division, and it's something that like is really relevant, I think, to the struggles we're having now, and that have been going on like since the beginning of time. It's always, as a society, as humans, there's us and there's them, and it doesn't matter whether it's the
all
Romans
around the world
and the Germanic tribes. Like there's an us. We are the civilized great people, and those people, they're barbarians.
Yeah.
And I think that,
and like it's within classes too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we're
definitely
here. Yeah.
So I think that's just, that is a theme that will come up, and I think we'll get into some, especially book 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we'll hit it hard, like 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
That division and that racist, for lack of a better term, like that racist, that judgmental, that us versus them kind of thing.
That does remind me, like the one good thing that they kind of point out to try to merge, and there's probably a couple of them, but like off the top of my head right now, when Sirius is like, the world isn't divided between like Death Eaters and
good people.
Yeah. So, and it's true. Like, I don't want to get too into, don't want to get like too
I
into
think
the
that that's a valid
but
point. Like we talk about each of the characters have a flaw, and where, you know, Hagrid has this enormous good heart, this innocence about him, this general trust. And I mean, he would give his life for Harry. He attempts, like, I mean, if you think of the chase scene, he launches himself off that bike at the Death Eater, aiming a spell at Harry. Like, he could have died, and he doesn't think twice about it because he defends those he loves. But he's also easily tricked. He's arguably an alcoholic, and he's not, he can be mean. He's not very nice to Draco. He's very mean to Dudley. He does throw out that muggle word as almost a negative.
That's why I kind of like the again, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons, but like that grid that they have, it's kind of a nice way to see, like, because people aren't just, when you think of people good, like they have like the lawful versus neutral, chaotic, because there's a spectrum of that. There's a spectrum of good versus evil, and even that, like, it's probably beyond, people don't fit nicely into those boxes either.
No,
but it's still nice to kind of have like a little bit of a rubric, so it's not just black and white.
And
you're
it's
good
also
and
something,
or you're evil.
That, like, and it's interesting, like working with children and raising children, which is hard. Especially, like, you think that the baby stage would be the hardest. It is not. So they get bigger, and then they like start making those independent choices, and you're like, oh. And we came up against a situation where my daughter made a choice that was not fantastic. It wasn't detrimental, but it wasn't fantastic. She used she said something that was not nice, and she's like, I'm a horrible person. And I said, you're an overall kind, caring, loving individual, which is the truth. That is just, she's a big heart. But we don't always make the best decisions. As adults, we make mistakes. Right. So good people can do bad things.
Right.
Good people make mistakes, and no one is perfect. And I think that Rowling encompasses that. Like, you have really complex characters, and even our evil characters have some qualities that you at least can garner a little bit of sympathy. Like with Voldemort, I mean, look at his upbringing, look at, the cards he was dealt.
Yeah. And
even Dumbledore said to Harry, like, could you be feeling sorry for him? And, he said she had a choice. So he's talking about Merope. Like, she had a choice and she chose to die. So I don't know. I think that,
I have some theories about his mom, but I'm not going to get into those until we get there.
So I think this kind of brings us up to Petunia's tirade.
Yes. I love it. It's all just one big breath of releasing that she's been holding on to for years.
Freak, abnormal. Like, just, she's been holding that. And with her, we know later on that stems out of jealousy. She wanted that.
And so what's kind of weird here is that Lily comes home from every vacation or holiday and turning teacups into rats. But she's not supposed to use
been.
Yeah, she's not supposed to use magic outside of school. Now, like, Snape lives close. So how does this trace work?
I don't know. And I still think this is, and they have homework. Like, so do you just like don't get to practice it for 2 months?
Or is it just like that they have to only read about like the theory of it
I don't know.
Over the summer, and then they actually get to practice what they've read about later?
I think it's made worse. Like, her jealousy is made worse by her parents being all like, "Oh, cool, we have a witch in the family."
Really into it. Yeah, they were proud of having a witch in the family.
What happened to their parents?
I feel like there's something about this on Pottermore, but I don't know off the top of my head.
We'll have to look into that because I've always wondered that.
Yeah. Because it's weird that he has like no other family on James' side either.
James, I could almost argue that James was like one of those late in life babies because he's an only and he is very, very pampered, even adored.
Maybe.
Sort of. But that just in my head, I made that up. Like that's not canon or anything. Like I just made that up. That's my thoughts on James.
Right.
Like I could see his parents being older. But I could also see Voldemort targeting their families.
That's true too.
And again, like she gives out that they've got themselves blown up.
But how could a car crash kill Lily and James Potter? Like, and that again, it takes me back to those can wizards just not die of Muggle related things?
I know. But maybe they're just not driving a car. James doesn't strike me as the type that would hop in a car. But Sirius has the motorbike. Like, couldn't he arguably crash that?
Yeah, they totally could have. I mean, Hagrid could have crashed that motorbike in the 7th one. If they're magical, does that mean that they couldn't have died if they crashed the motorbike?
They almost do, though. Harry, like, breaks some ribs and loses a tooth and blacks out. And, I mean, Ted Tonks puts him back together, but it's bad stuff. You would think of that we'll get there, but I have a thought on that one, too. I like how Hagrid goes from angry to, oh my gosh, now I have to tell Harry what happened.
Yeah. As much as he seems to know about the situation, he doesn't seem to know about the situation.
Yes. Here's another interesting point. You made the comment that they talk about they mention Godric's Hollow and then they don't say it again. And even when Hagrid tells the story, he said the village where you were living.
Yeah.
He doesn't even say the name.
Nope. So at this point, Harry has never heard the words Godric's Hollow.
Yes.
Because it was only mentioned by McGonagall or Dumbledore. Hagrid, when he's telling him, he says that they were as good a witch and wizard as he ever knew, head boy and girl at Hogwarts in their day. But James, I don't see him being head boy. He was never a prefect. It was Lupin who got the badge.
But James was head boy. They did make him head boy, which I think is interesting. You don't have to be a prefect to be named head boy.
You don't.
Apparently not. They do. Weird. They confirm that he's head boy, and there's some interesting fanfic theory about this. In that, they were trying to kind of set him right.
Okay, because I think they do say later he got his act together in the 7th. Yeah, by his 7th year, and that's when Lily started taking an interest in him.
And he always, I mean, at least 5th year, at least, he had a thing for Lily for a long time. Yeah. And if he could think like, oh, if she gets to be head girl and I get to be head boy and I can do this, this, and this, he's gonna do like I think he would have done anything to get her attention. Yeah. Because obviously Remus with the badge wasn't holding it, wasn't doing enough with it. He just kind of was like, yeah, I'll discipline somebody else. So I'm going to ignore you. Kind of like Ron is a prefect. But so if you're a prefect, you get to be the prefect for the next year automatically as well. So there would be at least, so they get the badge in 5th. So 5th, 6th, 7th, there would be at least 3 prefects. 6, 1 boy, 1 girl for each house total. But the prefect... Is there always a prefect in the 7th year, or does just a random person get to be added on as head boy, head girl? So Lupin would still be a prefect in his 7th year, even though, because the way Percy does it is he's prefect, head boy. Yes. And Ron and Hermione are prefect, and they don't go to school the 7th year, so we don't really get to see what goes on. So I don't know about the system. I have no idea. I don't think you have to be a prefect to be head boy. And I think I think your 5th year prefects are the ones you're going to get the most effort out of because they're new and they're excited about it. Like Hermione, they say in book 6, like Hermione jumps up and she shepherds the new, and Ron's just like, yeah, I'm going to sit here and talk to Harry because he got his nose smashed and I want to know why.
Yeah.
Like he's got no interest in it. So I think Hagrid's retelling of the story is very basic, lacks a lot of detail, but there's some key points to remember that I kind of pulled out of it. One, you get to see his spotted handkerchief for the first time. We should do a ticker on how many times that appears in the story.
Yeah.
Because he uses that thing a lot. Because he's an incredibly emotional, he lives in that emotional state.
He must be a Cancer. or at least some sort of water sign.
But he talks about the people that were lost, the McKinnons, the Bones, the Pruitts, which the Bones, it's not Madame Bones. Is that Susan's parents? Is she raised by her aunt? Do we know this?
I have that question in here because I asked, is Susan Bones an orphan too? Because she mentions her auntie all the time.
Mm-hmm. And the Pruitts, we know that's Molly's brothers, which brings us, like, when we get to the 5th book, she has a huge fear of loss. Yeah. And I know, like, if I'm incredibly close with my siblings. I don't know what Molly's relationship with her brothers was like. I would be devastated to lose them. And it would make me hold even tighter to the family that I have. So, and
if they were older brothers, then they might have had older kids who are also in the order, like how Bill and Charlie are in the order. So they might have taken care of like her nephews and nieces and stuff too, if they had children.
Yeah.
And like, he also took care, like when he says like he took care of his mom, the dad, and the house. Like,
it did blast a big hole in the house.
How?
I don't know, but it did. We see the house. We get to see the house.
But like, why? Like, was it like, if it was like the rebound and if it devastated the house, then wouldn't you think like Harry and Voldemort would have been a bit more mangled from it?
I don't know. I feel like it just went.
I don't know. And Harry has a very good memory. Like
he does.
1 year old when this happens. He remembers the flying motorbike, the green light, and now he's hearing this cold, high-pitched laugh.
But he doesn't see Thestrals.
Right.
And I think Rowling even admits later on that that's kind of a flaw.
Yeah.
But,
I think there's a couple of them, like when they do the Priori Incantatem with like the wands and all the spirits start coming out of it. I think his dad comes out first and then his mom. But if they're going in reverse order, then his mom should have came out and then his dad.
His mom comes out first.
Does she? Could have sworn I heard
this. Hold on for your father. And then he gives him the instructions.
Okay.
But anyway.
I thought I saw something somewhere that said that it was reversed, but you can't believe anything you hear on the internet.
I like Uncle Vernon's very matter-of-fact load of old tosh. Like,
yeah.
There's something strange about you. Probably nothing a good beating wouldn't have cured. And it's like, you've given him a number of good beatings. We know this. Like, we can assume this. And if you haven't, Dudley has. Didn't cure him.
And if they're that worried about it, then they literally could have sent him to St. Brutus's and not Stonewall.
Yeah.
Like, if a good beating was going to beat it out of him, then they should have sent him to, instead of the local, like, public school, which I don't know, like, the class size of Hogwarts and how many wizards per square area of whatever. But do you ever think like one of these Muggleborns goes like they're in school together and then like they end up both at Hogwarts together? Like, oh my gosh, we were just in elementary school together and now we're both here. Hogwarts. Yeah. And if somebody from like, say, Harry's class, and I know this doesn't happen, but just like theoretically, like was a Muggle born and knew nothing of Hogwarts, but then like ends up at Hogwarts and sees Harry there, and they're like, oh shit, like I did nothing to help that kid when he really needed it, and now we're going to be in the same class together. Like, this is awkward. And okay, so now that I'm thinking about Muggle-borns and like their introduction into the wizarding world, how do they learn about Harry, Voldemort, and that whole story? And then like, why would they be afraid to say Voldemort's name? Harry's not, like, you know, he
Harry
learns about it and he's like, because it doesn't affect him. He's 11 years old. He doesn't understand like the huge fear, and most 11-year-olds wouldn't, like, especially enough to say like the name.
So I wonder if like when those people come to explain, they give like here, these are some of the things, like here's a basic history, or, you know, current happenings. Like, and then you like look at Hermione, who gets Hogwarts a history, which if I could get J.K. Rowling to write a book, I want Hogwarts a history. I would be the one to read it.
I would too.
That would just be so fascinating to me. Anyway, so
it would probably be like something super thin. Like this is 2 of their textbooks right here. Like Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. It is so thin. And I would be super disappointed if she wrote a Hogwarts a history and it was this.
Hermione mentions how many pages it is. It is not a small book.
It better not be if she ever does write it. The other one here is Quidditch Through the Ages, by the way, which is the most boring thing I've ever read. I can't get this back in. I'll do that later.
I do like that Hagrid does say, well, some say he died. He's like, I don't know if he was human enough to die. So there's already that foreshadowing that he is not gone. Right up front, we know that he's not gone.
So now I was going to say, like, the next thing I have in my notes is about him causing pain on Dudley. Like, it actually, like, how he's howling in pain when he gets that pigtail on him.
I think that would hurt to grow a tail.
It would hurt to grow a tail. I mean, I have some lower back pain from sleeping wrong. Like, I can't imagine a tail poking out of my lower back and tailbone area.
I think even before that, we'll get onto his tail. But I think we kind of glossed over Harry saying, I don't know, I think you got this wrong. I can't be famous. I can't, like, why? The Dudley beats me up all the time. The Dursleys bully me all the time. Like, how can I be a wizard? And Hagrid has to kind of convince him and point out, like, yeah, haven't you ever made anything weird happen? Oh yeah, the glass vanished.
Yeah. I mean, one time I set a boa constrictor on my cousin, but
I love how casually he mentions that too.
Yeah.
He says it basically the same way in the second book. Well, I set a boa constrictor on my cousin once.
Yeah, just once though.
No big deal. But I think that, you know, like we talk about Harry doubting himself a lot.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, one of those times that it comes up.
I think once he gets to Hogwarts, he doesn't seem to doubt himself as much. Once classes start and sees that he's on the same level as like Ron and stuff like that, he's like, all right, I got this. And his confidence picks up pretty quickly.
But he's not James.
Not yet. I feel like he might get there eventually.
I don't know. I think that there is a general sense of humility to Harry. He doesn't have that. Like, James would just hex people because they annoyed him. James thought he was the height of cool. And Harry, like, he kind of shies away from that attention.
Right. I know he doesn't want to be thrust in. He just kind of always is. Well, like in book 5, when he's not getting the information he wants, that's when he's all like internally, I think he thinks he's better, but because it's been kind of like, because the Dursleys kind of knock him down a peg, like externally, I don't think he lets it show unless he's like emotional about it. Because he's like, it was me who did this and I did that and I did this and I did that, and
I don't like Harry in book 5.
Yeah, I actually really like Harry in book 5 because he is such a jerk, and it's like, and okay, that's just okay. If you're a psychiatrist watching this, don't analyze me too hard, because like that's my relationship status, like all the way. It's like when people are jerks, I tend to gravitate towards them. But like, but seriously, like that is kind of that very basic, like it's one of the things that the movie leaves out. You know what I mean? Like Harry's always that good, posh, top of the line, like doesn't really lose his temper, but is a little bit sassy. But it's like, no, he's a real person. When you get pissed off at people,
and he's mean to the people that are closest to him. He snaps at Ron and Hermione throughout the book. And I get he's there, the trauma he has undergone, even just if you just take the chunk of the end of Goblet of Fire. Like I was tied to a headstone, watched somebody cut off their hand, watched a fellow classmate be murdered, was sliced open, had to do battle, saw the ghosts, or they're not ghosts, but shadows.
Yeah, their essence.
Shadows. Yeah. Of all of these people, my mother and father, fought for my life, barely escaped, found out the guy that I was like trusting, because it's Mad Eye Moody and he's this great guy, was actually a bad guy in disguise.
Yeah.
And then find out that he's been obliterated because of the, like the Dementor kissed him. So that he's like a shell of a being anymore, which is a horrible fate for anybody. And I'd be angry too.
Yeah. Plus,
so I get it. I just don't.
Plus, just like add in 15-year-old angst. So I don't know. To me, it just makes him more of that well-rounded character, just not one note type of thing.
Yeah.
And I just like it because it's a different side of Harry.
I find it essential to his development as a character. I appreciate it from a literary perspective. I appreciate it from the story development. I appreciate it as knowing like development in general, and that is part of him developing as a human, from a trauma response, all of that. It doesn't mean I have to like him. And I can remember my one sister that I'm actually, she's, we joke about this. When she was 14, 15, 16, we could not stand each other. I was, just starting a family, but I was helping my mom a lot with like getting kids to school and things like that still. Like we were, and we just could not, like, I couldn't stand her teenage angst. So, and that's what she reminds me. Mine is all the trauma. She reminds me a little bit of Harry in that, like, just, she was an angsty teenager. And my age at that time, I had zero tolerance for her teenage angst. So
I think that's one of the things, like, why teenagers feel so misunderstood is because by the time their parents are old enough, they're just like, I think the parents are cresting in the, that time of their life of no more drama. I'm too old for this stuff. And then here come the teenagers and they're just starting the drama. And they're like, oh no, I'm trying to get away from that. And then there's that clash of you trying to escape it versus while in the meantime, trying to remember what it was like when you were that age and trying to connect with that. And I think I read something somewhere recently that said whatever age your trauma occurs at, that's kind of like the age that you're mentally stuck at. So I don't know. Harry's had trauma his whole life, it seems.
Yeah.
So it doesn't apply in the book.
And I think Harry does a good job of kind of moving through it. And he has a goal in mind. He's very goal oriented in that he is going to, even before the prophecy, like he knows he has
Yeah.
to be the one. And he
Right.
wants to be the one. He wants that revenge. Revenge is a powerful motivator.
Mm-hmm. Which is weird because revenge seems to be on the opposite side of love. Or I guess, but like
I don't know,
the way that Dumbledore words it, it's like revenge because of love, or because you love, then you can seek revenge. But typically those seem like revenge and forgiveness are like on the opposite ends of things.
And in the end, he offers Riddle, like he, in his, like when they're circling, he says, try for some remorse.
Yeah.
Try for some remorse. And he, because I think in the end, there's a touch of pity there. He knows that Voldemort is beyond help.
Yeah.
But we know, like, knowing what we know in that King's Cross station, like that pitiable creature was actually the fragment of Voldemort's soul.
Mm-hmm.
And Harry has this intense, like he's repulsed by it, but he's like, I should help it. But,
right.
I should help it, but like, and I guess love, they always say love and hate are really two sides of the same coin. The opposite of love is apathy. And I'm a firm believer in that. If you're apathetic, that's something like, as a very passionate individual, that I can't abide by apathy. That's my pet peeve, which gets you into a lot of trouble at like work and stuff, because most people
right.
don't have that level of let's do this on a regular. So we're turning Dudley into a pig.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to use magic.
Right.
I love how Hagrid breaks the rules all the time. But strictly speaking, I'm not supposed to use magic. So don't mention that I gave him a tail.
But he was allowed to do a bit of magic to come and get him. So allowed by who? Like, I mean, Dumbledore doesn't, and I know that Dumbledore likes to wield the authority he doesn't have officially, but because Dumbledore's the same way. He's like, he creates a port key right in front of Fudge. Dumbledore, you can't just
like, you can't do that. Dumbledore just looks at him like, yes, I can.
Yes, I can. So like, I mean, Dumbledore's above the law, which nobody really should be. Like, no matter how good your purposes are, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
You see a lot of that in the later books, like that above the lawness. Like McGonagall just ran, like there's so much she could have done differently, but she just imperiouses the Caros. Like, here, give me your wand, get your sister's wand, let me tie them up in a net. Yeah, I mean, they're the bad guys.
I mean, like they break the rules for like first stages never get on the house team, like on the Quidditch teams, but we're gonna break the rules because McGonagall wants to, and Dumbledore's just gonna let her. Like, they break the rules so much because they can, because they're above it, and they don't care. Like, I'm gonna try to watch my language. I realized afterwards I swore a bit in this one, so but yeah, they're above.
I feel like it's kind of like the pirate code. They're more like guidelines anyway.
Yeah. And the Wizarding Age and the Pirate Age are probably on a similar age timeline,
like
right?
Guidelines anyway.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you are super rule driven, you can end up boxing yourself into a corner. There has to be some flexibility. Mm-hmm. Because if you are super rule driven, you end up Barty Crouch, you end up Percy, you end up Umbridge. Like in this narrow-minded, I would argue that being that you were talking about that grid, lawful good can be very, very damaging. Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely can see breaking the rules for the right reason. I just think that sometimes Dumbledore gets so used to it that he's just like, whatever. Hagrid, you can, like, because he could send anybody else. He could send McGonagall. She's the head of the house. She's the head
deputy headmistress.
Deputy headmistress.
I have another question about Hagrid, like, and this is something that popped up to me. He was expelled, and obviously he did not have a home to go to. Mm-hmm. But if I can choose to homeschool my children, I don't have to send them to Hogwarts. So why would it matter if he got expelled?
Yeah. So,
and the reason Harry is in trouble with the Ministry, and yes, he could get expelled from Hogwarts for it, but he broke a law. So they could take away his wand for that. But did Hagrid break a law?
well, a girl did die. And
but if they really thought Hagrid murdered Myrtle, spoiler alert, do they, like, wouldn't he be in Azkaban? I don't care. He's just a third year.
That's the thing, is like he's a third year under Professor Dippet, even though he said that it was Dumbledore who got him the job. So he either had some time away from Hogwarts and then went back to school under Dumbledore when Dumbledore became headmaster. And I think he mentions before he goes to Azkaban in the second one, didn't he say that he was in Azkaban before, or did they only cart him away in Chamber of Secrets because it's happening again?
Yeah, they only carted him away in Chamber of Secrets because it was happening again, which I don't get. Like,
yeah, so you can murder the girl.
I don't get wizarding law in that we think you might be guilty, so we're just going to put you in Azkaban just in case.
Right. Yeah, and then when their names are cleared, like, they're not going to do anything about it. Oh, Hagrid, now that we know that you didn't kill that girl, let's get you a new wand. And what's to stop him from getting a new wand anyway?
Yeah, I know. Like, you could break your wand and go get a new one anyway.
Yeah.
Why couldn't he just enroll at Durmstrang or enroll at Beauxbaton or go to America?
His wand still works. So, like, why couldn't he just
And how does his wand still work? Because we know in book 2 and in book 7, when the wands are broken, they don't work.
Right. Well, I don't know if it had something to do with, like, giant magic, but giants don't necessarily have, like, magic. They just have kind of like that strength.
And maybe that's why he seems like a very poor wizard, because his wand, like, Ron still works.
Yeah.
Not well.
Right. Well, Hagrid's doesn't work well. I mean, he can light a fire and he can make a pig's tail and not a full pig.
Yeah.
And I mean, transfiguration is hard enough to do at the best of times, let alone like with a broken wand.
And I like how when Harry's like, how did you get expelled? He's like, oh, we got a lot to do tomorrow. You might want to go to sleep. Here's my giant coat to sleep in.
Yeah.
Like, Hagrid, so, like, not even subtly changes the subject. He's like, oh, we've got lots to do tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. When people do go to Azkaban, what do they do with their wands? Like, Bellatrix still has hers. Like, when she gets out, doesn't she get her own wand back?
I like envision like a wall of everybody's wands.
So they just hold them up for like decoration.
Because some people don't go to Azkaban for their whole lives. They go to Azkaban for like a period of 6 months or.
Which is still very cruel.
Yes.
Like, yeah, like
I do love that Dumbledore
do like a minor infraction and that counts for like, well, you should probably get your soul sucked for a while.
And I know wrong. That like Rowling modeled the Dementors on depression.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just sad. Like that you would force anybody to feel that.
Yeah.
And I do love that Dumbledore says, I don't think the Ministry is right to align with them.
Yeah. And we'll get into that. That's actually the book that I'm listening to right now. And like when they start describing it, like there's a whole thing. Like in my head, I'm like, when we get to this chapter, I'll write it all down. But like in my mind, it was triggering me. So because I know that she modeled it off of depression, and having lived with depression like most of my life, like there are some things like I'm like lining up now. So yeah, we'll get there. Those are all my notes that I had aside from the audiobooks.
I feel like there's a lot more British speak in this chapter. Like just some of the phrases and stuff.
There wasn't a lot of key differences in this. And I think a lot of that is because like when I'm listening to this, and again, I have the British audiobooks, and like Hagrid's dialect that Stephen Fry uses Like he does a wonderful job with the accent. And I've talked to people before, and I remember when I was younger, like I had a hard time reading this book because, and like all of the Harry Potter books until, like just because, and I think it was easier for me because I watched the movies first and then read the books, because then I could have like what he says going through my head. But like when it doesn't line up, you know, because the books have more meat and potatoes. They have a lot more to them. So if it wasn't a line that he said in the movie, it was a lot harder to read in the book. So because the spelling is different, it's a different dialect in like in England too. So I don't know what it is, and I've talked to a few people who have tried to read the books who have said that they couldn't read the books and they didn't even like the movies because they could just not understand what he was saying. So, but yeah. So some of the differences, and there weren't too many in this one: crisp and chips again, math and maths, because mathematics has an S on the end. So that's why when you abbreviate it, it's maths. When they're talking about this, in his letter, his acceptance letter, we have to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts versus you have been accepted. Also in his letter, term begins the 1st of September instead of September 1st.
They write their dates differently.
Yes. And the same thing with we await your owl no later than the 31st of July versus July 31st. There's a which and a that. Here's another one that was like really kind of threw me off. When I listened to it, I had to re-listen to it to make sure that I heard it right, because Hagrid writes his letter, "Dear Mr. Dumbledore," not Professor, which is weird because I would actually imagine that to be the opposite.
Yeah.
And then holiday and vacation. So, but some of those, like the Mr. and the Dumbledore was the one that really stood out to me in that.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
That was a lot. We got into a lot of stuff. Like I felt like this was a short chapter and I was like, oh, we won't talk for very long.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a shorter chapter too, because my notes were not nearly as long as some of the other chapters.
Kind of rabbit holed a few times. It was really good content, but just still rabbit holing.
We rabbit hole a lot.
Well, that's just how our brains work.
True. Yes, and that is our perspective. So let us know your perspectives in the comments. Before we go, we would like to thank our editor, Alan, our families, our listeners, and remember to like, share, subscribe, and support. Until next time, stay safe, keep faith. Good night.